So, we're going to be doing a pixel art workshop today. I've been wanting to do this for since I became an officer, so I'm excited to be presenting it for y'all. So yeah, open up Sprite if you've got it. If not, don't worry. This workshop does not require any particular software. So we're going to start by discussing what this workshop will cover. We're not going to be talking about how to use Sprite. I don't think that's a what.
I don't use Sprite.
Shut up. I don't think that's a valuable use of a pixel art workshop because it's a software that's like fairly easy to pick up. I think most of you are smart, with a few exceptions, and and I think you can figure it out. And it's also not going to cover how to draw in general. So shading, highlighting, colors, blocking, silhouettes, stuff like that. Not going to be covering that. I'm assuming that I can meet you in the middle of whatever artistic skill level you're at. And if not, this workshop's not for you, I'm sorry. What we are going to do is we're going to focus on pixel art conventions and techniques, when to use them and when to break them. And I'm going to provide you some additional resources at the end to help you practice pixel art and continue learning on your own. And I'm going to grab my
I lost it.
And you're also going to get some homework. So, yeah, you enjoy that. Okay. So we got seven, I think, pixel art principles to cover. First one being jagged. So essentially, in pixel art, thank you. In pixel art, there are proper ways to draw curved lines, I suppose, in which there is a increase in the line segment in each one. This helps to indicate a smoother curve than, for instance, you'll see here. We've got a segment of 3 pixels, a segment of 4 pixels rather than the other way around, and then a segment of 1 pixels into 2 pixels, and it doesn't look quite as smooth. Sometimes it's the look you want, but in general, the best practice for making smooth curves is to follow a steadily increasing series of line segments like this. In addition, pixel art is not great for making straight line segments of certain slopes, I suppose. We've got a 45-degree slope here, and that works totally fine. But if you want to make something a little more specific, you're going to have to deal with a jagged line. There are some ways to work around this, such as anti-aliasing, which we'll discuss later. But for the most part, it's good to know that pixel art is not fantastic for lines with an inconsistent slope. So 1, 1, 2 rather than 1, 1, 1 or 2, 2, 2, stuff like that. Next up, anti-aliasing. So this is a technique in which you add a half value to smooth out curves. And in general, with game development, you kind of want to be careful of using external anti-aliasing in game assets. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the example I've provided here, the anti-aliasing on this exists on the outside of the sprite and kind of bleeds into the background. Whereas on Kirby, you can see he doesn't have any of that, but he does have some anti-aliasing on the inside. Now, the reason it doesn't work for game assets is because in games, you're going to have dynamic backgrounds and you're not going to have a consistent color. So, unless if you want to get into transparency for your sprites, which I would not really recommend, you're going to end up with scenarios where if you use these specific colors, it will clash pretty heavily with most of your backgrounds that aren't just plain white. And then in addition to that, the example I've got over here is what I would consider as being too much anti-aliasing. You can kind of see a good rule of thumb, I would say, is that if your anti-aliasing adds actual volume to your sprite rather than just refining the shape, it's probably too much. So you can see that kind of here in this curve where it basically just looks as though it gets thicker towards the middle. In addition, on this example, we've got some banding here. You generally want to avoid banding. It makes your sprite blurrier and just isn't fantastic practice. And what I mean by banding is just surrounding the entire sprite with the color you want to use for your anti-aliasing. Up next, we are going to talk about clusters. So clusters are something that's a little unique to pixel art. So because of the fact that each pixel matters and you want your sprite to be as readable as possible, avoiding noisiness and whatnot, you generally want to stay away from using a single pixel to texture or just block in the shapes for your sprite. So I stole this example from the internet because it was a good one. And you can see here on the second picture, we're kind of, it might be hard to see from the back, but there are red outlines around each of the individual pixels of one color that are being used to texture this cookie sprite. And in the final example, they've been replaced with one of these types of clusters. And generally, that just is a little bit more readable, a little bit more clean. There are exceptions to it with much smaller sprites. Like you can see this sprite I did for Six Floors Under. It kind of breaks this rule by having two uh, single pixels where the like vest buttons would be. And generally, like as with basically all of the slides that I'm going to cover for these principles, they can be broken. It just takes a trained eye to do so, I would say. Um, so the reason why I think that this works a little bit better than this is because it's conveying a specific detail, the buttons, and it has a pretty solid contrast, whereas these are roughly trying to convey the same hue. It's pretty monochrome. Um, so that's kind of where you want to use them and avoid them. Um, Up to you. That's the whole shtick of learning art, I suppose. And then up next, we've got pixel perfect lines. So a lot of beginners to pixel art will make the mistake of drawing these types of lines where you see that there is this extra pixel, which I've just colored in red for all of them, that add a bit of uh, width to the lines that you're drawing. Something that you kind of want to avoid if you want your lines to be a consistent width. So you can see on this example, the lines are a little bit more consistently wide than these ones. There is a time and place for doing these types of lines, though, and I've provided a second example to display that, as well as an actual sprite, so you can see it in context. Um, so down here, we've got two sprites that kind of follow this convention of line drawing, a circle and a square. For the square, the way that outline is done will convey a sharper edge compared to this one where it appears a little bit rounded. So if you're trying to make something that has a clearly sharp corner, which in this example up here, you can see in the ears, as well as in the collar of this sprite. That was also for Six Floors Under. So, as with basically, like I said, every single one of these, it is up to the eye of the beholder. It's just something that is good to be aware of. Next up, we got palettes. The Max palette. Yep, that's the one I use. It's pretty okay. So, in a lot of pixel art sprites, it's just kind of a convention that they tend to use very limited palettes. It can be helpful when you're designing game assets because it can make a more cohesive set of sprites. And it's also just one of those things that's kind of become a tradition for the style, where, like, back when pixel art was the norm for creating game assets, having limited sprites or having limited palette sizes was just what they were working with. So you'll see in a lot of pixel art that people tend to stick to fairly limited palettes. Like for instance, with this palette, you have a very blue-green up here, like very cool green. You could also add a very warm green as an additional set of hues, but in a lot of palettes, you'll see kind of a middle ground in order to get the most bang for your buck out of the palette. It's something that doesn't super matter because there aren't the same technological limitations, but it is a convention of the style. Next up, we got dithering. So this is a way of indicating the gradation of colors in pixel art. So these are both an A sprite, both with the same canvas size. This one's just using a smooth gradient tool, and this one is using a dithering algorithm. So it is a lot more common if you want to use a gradient in pixel art for you to use this. It's also a good way of introducing additional shade tones if you want to stick to a really limited palette. Additionally, I find that dithering is best used for much larger sprites because when you use it on sprites that are, for instance, oops, what? Oh, that are this size, for instance, you are mostly just introducing noise. There's not really enough space in the individual blocks of color for you to actually read any dithering that you want to put down there as dithering. Um, so that's why I would recommend it for sprites that are much larger than this. Um, in these examples that are down here, you can see some dithering present in how the water is rendered. And then on this side, it's kind of hard to tell, but there is some dithering introducing a like transitional shade tone between this red here and this purple. And that's true of all of these colors. So that's some ways where you can see it in actual game assets. These are from Kirby's Dream Course. Um, Next up, we've got outline techniques. So there are a lot of different conventions for outlining in pixel art. There is no outlining, which can be more grounded, but similar to what I said about anti-aliasing, you have to be really careful with how you allocate your colors when you are not doing an outline. Reason being, similar to the anti-aliasing thing, backgrounds change. So, like for instance, you've got this sprite from Hyperlight Drifter right here. It doesn't have an outline. It would not work in as well in a context that relies heavily on the colors green or the colors red, because then you're blending it into the background and you don't have the outline to separate the silhouette from the background. And then black outline is simple and easy, generally fairly cartoony look, and pretty good for smaller sprites where you really want to place emphasis on the silhouette of your sprite. You can see that kind of here with this sprite of Frog from Chrono Trigger. He's got a mostly black outline, and because the sprite is so much smaller than the other ones here, it works pretty well at actually defining the shape of Frog, especially during animations where you've got a lot of moving parts and you want to keep track of the shape of your sprite. Um, there's also colored outlines, which basically these are outlines that reflect two parts of your sprite. The general color of the area you're outlining and the light that is hitting your sprite. So you can see that on the sprite up here, where we've got this orange shade color, or orange colors outlining the hair. But there's also a light source hitting it from this angle. So down here, you've got a much darker shade of orange, and up here, you've got a much brighter one. It's kind of inconsistent throughout this sprite, but that is a good example of that outlining convention. Lastly, there's selective outlining, which was hard to find a really solid example of, but there are a few ways you can do selective outlining. So for one, you can see it in a few areas on this sprite of Getsus. At the top of this hair here, they opt to not include the rest of the outline. And I would guess that's just to make it so that that strand of hair kind of tapers off rather than maintaining a consistent volume through the outline. In addition to that, where you just kind of like don't include an outline on certain parts of your sprite for one reason or another, there's another way to do selective outlining in which you basically combine colored outlining and black outlining. So you use colored outlining in areas where there is heavy light hitting your sprite, and you use black outlining in areas that are pretty heavily shaded. I don't have a I guess Getsus also kind of works as that because his hair is pretty heavily shaded, but his cloak's more black. But that's also just because those are the colors that were chosen. But you get the picture. Okay, now we've got some sub-pixel animation. This is by far the most complicated, like, pixel art specific principle that I'm going to be covering. It's also the last one. Essentially, it is an animation technique that's used pretty frequently in pixel art where if you want to convey very subtle motions, you do so by introducing anti-aliasing into your animation. So you can see here in the example I've got, you've got both of these sprites are moving the exact same amount, but one has a lot more movement than the other. They're both on 8 frames, I believe. I might have increased it, but this one's just shifting up and down, Whereas this one is introducing some anti-aliasing to kind of slowly, over the course of 4 or 5 frames, move the actual silhouette of the shape from one pixel to the next. In the examples, you can see it used pretty subtly. It tends to be a very subtle thing. So, for instance, on Samus, the interesting thing about this idle animation is that if you were to shade it or color it completely black, just keeping the silhouette, it does not change at all. The movement of this sprite only comes through changing the values of the shading. So, for instance, on the feet here, you see the shading moves around a bit just to indicate that maybe her feet are shifting. Same with the arm cannon, has a little bit of differences in shading to indicate that maybe it's moving up and down very slightly. And that's also true of just her musculature. You can see through subpixel animation the very slight changes in her positioning. The rat also kind of uses it very subtly in the ear here. And Metal Slug, these two sprites are from Metal Slug, very heavily uses subpixel animation throughout all of its sprites. So if you want to learn more about subpixel animation, I would heavily recommend looking at Metal Slug for reference. Okay. Oops. None of it matters. As I already said, literally all of the sprites that I used in this workshop violate one of these principles. We've got single pixel clusters up here. Inconsistent outline. There's not an outline around this guy. More single pixel clusters, more. This one's fine. It's actually perfect. Next up, we've got jagged line here. We've got jagged line here. And more single pixel clusters. One thing to keep in mind, though, when you're looking at older sprites like this, specifically these two, Chrono Trigger for the NES, is that they were displayed on CRT TVs. So a lot of the techniques that they employ that more modern pixel art might shy away from is because of the CRT filter that blends the colors and whatnot. Okay. Oops. Why are we skipping around like this? Okay. So what's the point of knowing all this stuff? Like I've been saying, you can break any of these conventions you want, but it is very valuable when working in a particular medium or style for you to understand and be aware of the conventions that exist so that you can break them on purpose and break them in a way that enhances your art rather than makes it more noisy or less readable. And yeah, so yeah, break rules all the time. It's fun to do. It allows you to think more creatively, but understand why they exist. And now we have gotten through the end of the lecture, and I want y'all to, if you have a digital art software, to make some pixel art using some of the principles that I've discussed. I went through this really fast, so we have a lot of time to. Yeah, what's up?
Is this slideshow somewhere where people can go back and look through it all?
Yeah, I can make it available and just make an announcement out of it. I'll do that as soon as I am done up here, actually, because yeah, there's definitely it would be good to have them to review. So yeah, if you feel so inclined, making some pixel art while keeping these principles in mind would be pretty neat. And if you do that and then you submit it to the share your okay. If you do that and then you submit it to the share your work channel and kind of go through your process, you'll get 1 Max token. So you know, once I'm president, those will be worth so much.
You just said more. If you were president, then you value even more because it'd be rare.
All limited exotic.
There you go. It's win-win either way. So yeah, that is my assignment to you. We have plenty of time to work on that during club. So if you want to get started on that and you have any questions for me, feel free to ask. I can come over, help. Carson can also help. He's kind of smart. So can like Thomas. Thomas is a good pixel arter. Adam. They can all almost certainly help you with a lot of what I've covered, huh?
Where's Grart?
Where's Grart?
He's getting sick.
He's a no-show!
Oh, that's
Okay, and then lastly, just I have some additional resources that I'd like to cover because as much as I had wanted to present this information to y'all myself, it is also a lot more expansive and detailed than I could possibly present in the time I've been given. So I've provided y'all with a few YouTube channels that I would heavily recommend if you want to learn more about pixel art. Adam C. Eunice is probably my favorite because he has a heavy focus on animation and covers a lot of the more advanced technique in pixel art, such as he has a great video on subpixel animation that was way better than my explanation of it. Huh? He did, yeah. He played Six Floors Under.
yeah.
Then there's Brandon James Greer. He doesn't really do tutorials per se, but he has a lot of really interesting prompts that he makes videos of him doing that are really, really solidly capture the spirit of pixel art without necessarily being game assets. So he is great to follow along with for like just inspiration of a prompt to do if you want to learn more about working in pixel art. Lastly is Mortmort. I don't think this guy's really active on YouTube anymore, but he does have in his backlog of videos some really nice beginner tutorials for pixel art basics, as well as how to use Sprite.
Is that the one you got? Am I correct thinking about it?
Yeah, it might be. I think he's gone. I haven't really checked his YouTube channel in a while, so he might have gone through some rebranding. Oh, also, one more thing about Brandon James Greer that makes him a really nice resource is that he does not use Sprite. He uses Photoshop, and he has videos on how to set up Photoshop so that it can you can do pixel art in it. So if you don't want to buy Sprite, but you got Photoshop, and you want to learn how to do pixel art in there, yeah. Yeah. Also, you can get Sprite for free. I'm just saying, if you're more used to Photoshop, don't want to use a new software, check this guy out. He might speak. He might speak to you a little bit. And then, oh, I forgot to put. That's fine. So some non-YouTube pages that I felt were good to recommend are the Spriters resource. So this is a website that basically I can go to it real quick. This is the Spriters resource.
Yeah, I was gonna just recommend LibreSprite if no one wants to pay for like Sprite or something.
Yeah.
If you guys don't have a pixel editor, you should download LibreSprite. It's free and like.
Yeah, LibreSprite it is a fourth branch of Sprite that uses a older version. So you're missing out on some features, but like it is a fantastic option if you want to just investigate, see if it's something that's up your alley. Okay, so this is Spriters resource, and I love this website. I'm gonna type in the word crosscode.
This is a very good website.
Yeah, I love crosscode. And then I'm gonna uncheck sheets here, search again, crosscode. You now have access to every sprite sheet. Maybe every sprite sheet in the game crosscode. Yeah, there's a lot of them. It's all user uploaded. This is such a fantastic resource for looking into websites. Looking into pixel art. It's just like so many sprite sheets, so much reference material, and you get it with like, sometimes you can find GIFs of the animation, see how it all plays out. You can also just stick these images, download them, stick them into Sprite or Photoshop, look at it yourself, because it is in the original like resolution of the sprites. There's no upscaling. And then this is one I found like literally this morning while I was looking for more stuff, and I'm gonna use this. It is wild. This is the log of the guy who did pixel art for Celeste, Towerfall, upcoming Earthblade, and he has a massive backlog of pixel art. It goes for a while. It is like if you ever want it. Unfortunately, it's not really organized in a way that I would like, but I would definitely recommend just scrolling through this and seeing if you I mean, you'll learn something for sure because there's just so many of these,
Oh, they're all
and
gifts.
yeah, they're all gifts. They all have very in-depth uh, write-ups about the process. I'm so glad I found this. It's fantastic.
Yeah, send that like
Certainly.
Yeah, I'll send it in, I don't know, general talking, I guess. Um, and yeah, that concludes the part where I stand up here and talk a bunch. So
nice.
get to Sprighton.